What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson here with my co-host Julia Gledhill. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Excellent. Well, tired. Matt is not here because he's a busy guy. I think he's on his way to China, and better him than me. So we'll get a report when he comes back, I guess. So a bunch of stuff in the news. First thing, foreign policy had a piece that was part reporting, part analysis, identifying the 11 biggest influencers on foreign policy in Trump world. And it's a fucking nightmare. So you'll know some of these names: Bridge Colby, Fred Fleitz, Rick Grenell, Keith Kellogg, Robert Lighthizer, Johnny McGinty, Chris Miller, Stephen Miller, Robert O'Brien, Kash Patel, and Mike Pompeo. So these are people who want war with Mexico, want war with Iran. They wanted to bomb North Korea in 2017. They explicitly called for regime change in China in the last 12 months. They authored the draft executive order for Schedule F, which would fire all the civil servants and then rehire only those who pledge loyalty oaths to Trump. So this is the swampiest shit you can imagine. It's deep militarism. On some level, it's unsurprising because I think they all served in the last Trump administration. So it's surprise. But A, it's good to have the names of who these key idea men are, emphasis on the men. And B, it's worth flagging the Bridge Colby thing specifically, because during the GOP primary, Ron DeSantis was the Florida governor, the craziest, most racist, most conspiratorial about China, and Bridge was his main China guy, right? And at that time, there were people in Washington, including people that I had thought of as friends, who thought that Bridge was no longer in Trump's orbit, no longer in his good graces or whatever, distanced himself. That's clearly not true. He aligns himself with power. I said this at the time. And he pushes a maximalist position on China and then just takes that set of arguments to whatever feudal lord or despot or politician is going to take up the agenda. So this is what we've got. It's useful as a reminder that as critical as I am of Democratic Party and the Biden administration, and I have my grievances and all this stuff, they ain't the same as what Trump promises to bring, and it's kind of scary, predictably scary. So.
Yeah, I think what also stuck out to me about this foreign policy piece and Trump's influencers are just how many of them have experienced pretty significant failures in their careers. Like Lighthizer specifically, we're just doubling down on the trade war now? Is that really how we're going to spend the next 4 years if Trump takes office? I mean, it's wild, and I think we're going to talk about this a little bit, but the obsession with domestic manufacturing, it's very ahistorical. These people are just ready to double down on an approach that hurts consumers and ignores historical privileging of capital over labor that has actually gotten us to this point with manufacturing writ large and in the defense industrial base, which I've been reading a lot about recently. And I don't understand how, and also there's, several of these people have, lied, done crimes. And of course, that's the case for many people in positions of power. But it just kind of feels like it's almost there's such a volume of news about these folks that it's hard to keep up with, and we just kind of forget. And something that I've been thinking about a lot is watching Trump speak in interviews on public forums. He can just lie repeatedly, and people rarely push back on him, which I think is the case with a lot of these folks as well.
They're volume punchers. It's too much.
It's they just inundate us with so much bad behavior and misconduct that it's hard to hold them accountable or even keep track of what's going on. Yeah. I find it hard. I'm sure other people are much better at it.
No. Yeah. On the industrial, I have one more thing to bring up, I suppose, but on the industrial policy thing, you had a piece from Robert O'Brien.
Yes. Yeah, I did. So this one was pretty focused on manufacturing. It was less national security focused, but it was in the national interest. And he talks about, you know, America's industrial might is the foundation of our economic vitality, our economic resiliency. And he talks about how we need to, build this back up. And it's interesting because he actually like correctly identifies a lot of issues, which are that like, yeah, we've had, um, kind of a deterioration of the course of several decades and it's hurt people and da 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 da. He doesn't talk about like any of the causes of that deterioration. Like,
Can't
um,
imagine how all this happened.
yeah, and
Like,
it's like you think about like the Friedman doctrine and like that famous paper in the New York Times of where he kind of like outlined shareholder capitalism and how like businesses have no social responsibility and like their only responsibility is maximizing returns to shareholders. And it's just like I don't understand how you could ignore that history and the impact that it had on like growing managerialism and like financialization, and say that like more money is going to address these issues. Like you can't just throw money at something and expect the outcome to be different when there are structural impediments to changing the economy in that way. I know you've written a lot about this, but yeah, it's like he correctly identified a lot of things. He talked about EV manufacturing. He talked about China and like state control. But I just thought it was pretty interesting. I've been thinking about this in the context of the defense industrial base quite a bit because there have been a lot of reports out recently about generational investments in the industrial base. I'm just like, y'all, I don't understand how we're coming to this conclusion that more money is going to change these outcomes when there are like all of these like historical structural impediments that no one wants to talk about. And we're just supposed to like backtrack many decades of capital export and jobs exports to like change the nature of our economy. I don't know.
yeah. I'm glad you're going deep on this. This is like a big deal. So there's two thoughts. The Robert O'Brien piece, this fetish of like industrial renewalism or whatever. One, like you sort of said this, but industrial production is something that American firms outsourced to the global south when it was called the third world because it was cheaper than paying unions wages, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And our global economy was built on this division of labor that pushed the manufacturing offshore. And now Washington, which is filled with people who don't actually understand political economy,
Mm-hmm.
like they want the hegemon themselves to monopolize not just services and advanced sectors of the global economy, but they want to reclaim the only thing that we've allowed the rest of the world to actually do to grow themselves. And
Right.
that not only does harm to the global south, but like it's unrealistic in the way that you were hinting at, which is like, who's going to buy all this stuff that you produce if you kicked away the development ladder for other countries, you know?
Yeah.
And like, there's a darker side to this too, which goes back to a conversation that we had a few episodes ago that I feel like I cannot forget, where we talked, the tradwives thing came up, you know?
Mhm.
So like, um, I wrote recently, like no, like yesterday, a thing about the working classes and labor and stuff. But in that, I argued like MAGA wants the rich to get richer. That's not new, but they also want to advance that cause by betting on a revival of industrial manufacturing, decoupling from China, in a permanent war economy. And those things actually all go together in their minds because industrial capacity, the industrial base, is the basis for the permanent war economy. And it's how they think that they can sustain a patriarchal social order, which is the quiet part that the people like Robert O'Brien don't say out loud, but the rest of the MAGA people do say out loud. So, like, they want an economy where the white male worker's share of the national income is just enough that women will have to stay at home doing uncompensated domestic labor. And they think manufacturing might be the ticket for that because there was a brief window in history when organized labor was strong enough to make manufacturing jobs good jobs. And that sustained that social order, which people do not like now, except for MAGA people. That social order sustained the kind of economy that actually like reduced inequality and gave sustainable jobs to people for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, there is this evil convergence between militarism, jingoism, racism, war on the homeless, prison industrial complex, and patriarchy. And if you take that out of context, it's like, wow, that's a lot of shit. But like, the industrial capacity wager is actually part of all of that. It sits in the middle of it all. There's like, it's like a cross section, and like, you can't create that dystopia unless you imagine that you can recenter global manufacturing in the US, because that's what
Yeah.
the white male workers are going to do.
And the difference now is that, like, during the automobile boom, for example, capital investments and productivity gains offset rising wages. But given financialization and growing, like the artificial, inflation of management in our industrial sector, uh, you had your MBAs infiltrate literally factories, and they started prioritizing their quarterly earnings reports over productive capacity. So we can't just assume that, like, if we spend a bunch of money on, building production capacity, whether it be civilian or military, that it's going to like necessarily increase output, because again, companies care about shareholders, not about long-term productivity. Like, they're not spending their money on those things. So it's like we also have um, you know, less organized labor that they can't advocate for themselves. And we can't even expect those productivity gains or whatever to offset rising wages. And the wages aren't even rising. So it's like we're in an entirely different space. And that's what I'm finding really frustrating about the defense industrial base conversation specifically, which
It's
I won't ramble about.
reactionary.
But
It's react. Well, the ramble's good. The ramble's good. It's reactionary to imagine the past in a certain type of way and to try to reclaim it in the today. And
mm-hmm.
that's what's going on. Super dangerous. Part of why it's dangerous is because it's unmoored from reality. Like, you want the economy to be this type of way, but it ain't that type of way, man. And it's the economy. Like, you can't, like you said, you can't just fucking throw money at it. You know, it ain't a war. You can't just put bodies on the pyre. I mean, like, so I don't know. This is pretty fucked. What's fucked to me about this is that like a large portion of this reactionary vision is actually being carried out by the Democratic Party, by like people who nominally think of themselves as progressives, and it's in genuinely good faith. Like, they have a particular spin on all of this that
Yeah.
erases how much water they're carrying for like what's actually like a larger, darker project, and they just don't see it. And like, that's the thing that really that concerns me.
Yeah, I think what stumbles me about this though is the workforce issue. And nobody really knows what to do about that. I mean, like, industry is literally going into middle schools and trying to get people hooked on a uh like defense contracting path. I mean, that's literally something that the
Yeah.
undersecretary for industrial policy like said at a CSIS event, which is that we should recruit middle schoolers to like come work in defense manufacturing
Can you
facilities.
imagine being groomed when you're like 7 years old to go?
No. I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a child because honestly, it was Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and Blake Lively goes to Turkey. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But that's what I was trying to do. I was like digging up bones at my science museum. Although I remember being really disappointed because I walked away and they would like put it back in the sand and I was like, this is bullshit. But yeah, it's very reactionary. And in the context of the defense industrial realm, um, we have serious workforce shortages, and I like the answer, I guess, is to indoctrinate children on a defense career. But it's interesting. It's like no one's ever like, huh, maybe we should just do less, which I find really funny. It's like clear that, we can't fulfill what seem to be ever expanding security commitments, not always to treaty allies. And I'm, that's a whole nother conversation, but our domestic like acquisition plans too, as far as stockpiling and whatever. No, the answer is further entrench generations of Americans in a permanent war economy that does honestly little to keep them safe, to produce weapons that, God forbid, we ever need.
This makes me want to fucking throw shit. Like it's so this is when it starts to matter that the that defense spending has A, opportunity costs, B, very high direct costs, but also C, the job multiplier effect, the efficiency of the spending relative to other things you could be spending on, the interest-based financing of defense spending, which we like the
Mm-hmm.
debt servicing on that interest, which we pay an immense amount for.
Yep.
Like all of that is sort of weighing down the economy overall and making inequality within the economy worse. And as long as we're funneling the money into defense, but the reasoning for it has everything to do with like these imagined national security constructs and like abstractions about geopolitics and shit, we're basically like geopolitics laundering this theft from workers to like funneling money up, funneling
Yeah.
money up and then distributing violence down. It's
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
That's a good way to put it. No, I could say so much about this. I have been reading this book, which is The Economic Consequences of the Second World
Oh yeah,
War. And
yeah.
this guy is awesome. I'm actually talking to him next week. So shout out Alex Field
Good.
if you ever listen to this. But he's an economist at Santa Clara University. And he really like pushes back against this idea that like World
You'd
War
have
II
him on the pod.
spending was yeah. Oh, I should. I should
Yeah, let's
actually.
talk to him about the
Because
book on
I'm
air.
working on an industrial policy paper. So yeah, I've been like deep diving. But basically the short version of this is that he talks, he really deconstructs the narrative that military spending for World War II is like lifted us out of the Depression and had this like really positive impact on the economy, which like that narrative persists today, basically because we threw a bunch of money at industrial capacity that we then didn't need because we didn't have to like do war anymore for a period of time, and we were like emerging as the global hegemon, and it had actually like detrimental impacts on productivity long term. I'm so sick of this economic growth argument around the military budget and military spending as a percentage of GDP. I just think that it's like not that useful of a metric when you have things like obviously growing inequality, like decreasing military readiness, also productivity in a lot of sectors. So it's just like, what are we really getting at here when we're talking about military spending as some arbitrary portion of our economy, when if we invest in all of this like excess production capacity, like many in Washington are suggesting, as far as preparing for a great power conflict, because we're gonna run out of munitions in a week if we go to war with China. Like, well, what if we don't? I mean, isn't that the ideal situation? And then we're just going to be spending money on all of this industrial capacity that we don't need, and that's actually going to hurt us long term. So it is actually stealing. Like, I feel like I'm being stolen from. I don't want to pay for this.
Well, the important thing is that we do World War III in order to pump up GDP.
Yeah,
So,
because God forbid.
never mind who benefits from GDP, whatever the fuck that is.
Yeah, no, maximum growth forever. And the more we spend on military spending, magically we're going to change the incentive structure for military contractors to do things efficiently and to cost minimize. Like, that's ever happened. Like, I just don't understand these like broad statements based in nothing except for
It's vibes.
propaganda.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. One more thing for in the news. So, or maybe two things. So one thing to note is like Robert O'Brien, of course, this was Trump's national security advisor. He's on the list of influencers for fucking MAGA Trump world. Very dystopian stuff. It's notable that he wrote this piece that you're talking about industrial capacity in The National Interest, because
Mm-hmm.
the national interest is owned by the Center for the National Interest. And the arrangement is something comparable to like how Council on Foreign Relations owns Foreign Affairs magazine, and the guy, Dimitri Simes, who was the president and CEO of the Center for the National Interest for like 20 years, 30 years, like up until Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. He was running that institution. He's just been arrested and like possibly indicted from the Justice Department, and I don't know the details about this, and I didn't have time. Like I just found out about this before we came on, so like I don't have a ready hot take, but I find it uh, interesting that the National Interest as a publication has these kinds of fingerprints associated with it, because they do publish for the past like 5-6 years a lot of like MAGA foreign policy stuff, but they also publish stuff that's actually good.
Yeah.
And like they're kind of like a home for like mainstream dissent on foreign policy or whatever, or
Huh.
like non-liberal internationalist bullshit. And so like I don't know how to think about this exactly, because I don't want some I'm not interested in a platform that becomes like a mouthpiece, or like, sock puppets for Russia or sock puppets for MAGA, and those things actually very much overlap weirdly. But also like I do like that they publish good things. I mean, like, there's one guy who publishes there frequently, Paul Here, who's like really smart on China, and he worked in
Mm.
like the National Intelligence Council. And I wouldn't see some of his writing if they weren't publishing it. So I don't know how to think about this.
I know. I feel the same way. I enjoy a lot of their work. I published for them like a month ago, actually, on a piece on how the defense industry price gouges the Pentagon. Um, they do it legally. That's why it's so hard to track, is the point of the piece. Because I was like hearing a lot from folks like, do you have examples of price gouging, like Ukraine aid? I was like, y'all, it's gonna take years to do this work. Like, I'm waiting for the IG to like mostly do it for me. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, this story with Dimitri Simes, what I got from the headline, which it did break right before we're recording, but yeah, they were, I guess, working for RT, dual citizens, he and his wife. And I guess they should have told the United States government basically that they were doing that, obviously, because of sanctions. But what I thought was interesting is there's a lot of foreign influence conversation news happening this week. Yesterday, there was that piece of news about Attorney General Garland charging also two RT employees with conspiracy to commit. Was this the same story? I'm thinking about the influencers, the right wing influencers who unknowingly did work for this like Tennessee based company that was funded by the Russian government to like push
Yeah.
um, content, pro Russian content, but like in a way that basically was just Russia's sort of interest in sort of stoking domestic uh, uh, conflict and divide. There was like Tim Pool and Benny Johnson,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they were making so much money. Like it was 400K a month and like 100K signing bonus for like maybe 4 or 5 videos, which is
Wow.
wild.
Wow.
But Ken Klippenstein, who's formerly of The Intercept but now independent, had a really good Substack about this, which was basically like, yeah, obviously foreign influence bad, but like these guys got like maybe 16 million views on YouTube, which is like a pretty big platform. And Ken was like, not to toot my own horn, but I'm just a guy and I got like almost 500 million on Twitter in the past year. So like I do think that
One guy is out producing and outreaching the entire RT apparatus in America.
yeah, yeah. Like and literally, I mean, these RT employees, I think it's the same story. I think I'm maybe thinking these are different stories because of the influencers, but I think it's the same thing. I mean, Russia spent like apparently almost $10 million contracting this like media company in Tennessee to then hire influencers and pay them egregious amounts of money, almost $500,000 a month, plus like bonuses based on performance and a signing bonus, just to kind of like toe the line for Russia, I suppose. But I also think it's just like a little bit silly that they only got 60 million views and they're being paid this much money and they didn't know they were working for Russia.
The
Like,
ROI is shit for Russian propaganda.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's like, obviously it's bad, but this actually transitions pretty well, I think, into like my good take for this week.
Yeah.
If you want to go there. There was this piece in Responsible Statecraft by Thomas Brody, and he talks about disinformation and how the United States also has its hands dirty in this arena. No
Mhm.
surprise, I think, to anyone, but I thought it was really well timed because there was this Russia Today news, and people are, reflecting on propaganda in the 2016 election, etc. And the United States does this too. Um, he points out that the World Economic Forum, a recent report by them, actually named misinformation and disinformation as the single greatest threat to global stability for 2024 and 25. Makes sense to me. But like, we have been doing these types of social media campaigns for a very long time, since like 2011. There was like a military program then using quote unquote sock puppets, which are fake social media
This is
accounts
when I
to
worked in the
spread,
Pentagon. Yeah.
yeah, pro-US narratives. There was like a Stanford Internet Observatory study about this last year, I think. We do this too. We do this too, and basically, when Russia or China does it, it like sucks. Obviously, it's not great for democracy and elections, but I don't know, we're hypocritical, and frankly, like 60 million views, not that big of a deal.
The whole thing, the focus on disinformation as like a threat is it's out of proportion to its actual impact, I
Yeah,
think. But
exactly.
even if it wasn't, like you're saying, the hypocrisy means that we make the problem worse for ourselves, which is like that is the self-licking ice cream cone of American exceptionalism, is to like perennially act in ways that do harm to your own interests on your own terms. Never mind the fact that the way you calculate your own interests is like not wise, but like just accepting your own reasoning, you undermine yourself, it seems like, um so that's a problem. But like there's also this larger, all of these various news stories that you're mentioning, it's all kind of like a larger witch hunt against Russia right now and against things like foreign interference, and like that's some dark shit. Like that reinforces the nationalism versus nationalism, which is the larger political construct that justifies the shift to economic nationalism. And economic nationalism is the ideological basis for a permanent war economy now. And so like that's what makes militarism possible. And so once again, this bullshit is like all related, you know? And
Hmm.
so even if you think disinformation or propaganda from a foreign government, even if you think that's a fucking super threat, you if you treat it that way by doing it in kind, you're just like creating a larger system that ends up justifying this national security state that requires global commitments, global operations, that risks World War III ultimately, that sacrifices, you know, poor people and workers on bad geopolitical objectives or fuzzy judgment, fuzzy reasoning, and that's going to end up costing money and making a worse economy, and then it's that's vicious cycle.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's bad.
Yeah. I do think it's a vicious feedback loop. I did just Google it, and apparently the indictment of Dimitri Simes, the national interest guy, and his wife is different from the Attorney General Garland charging of the two RT employees, like different people, four people involved in propaganda controversy this week. But I think that the other thing is that, like, yeah, I mean, I think like us doing it and being hypocritical is probably not great, and incentivizes others to do so as well. But also, like, the balance of power is totally different. Like, it makes sense that Russia would do more.
It's
I mean,
asymmetric, yeah.
yeah, it's like we are in a different position in terms of global influence and stuff. So it's kind of like, are we really going to stoop that low? It seems a little silly. But yeah, the internet is scary. Obviously, like, the reason the Biden administration wanted to like get rid of TikTok is because too many people think human life is valuable. And the Biden administration didn't want to have to deal with that, but they're simultaneously campaigning on there. So yeah, it is about control. And I do think it securitizes spaces that makes people like even more skeptical of democracy, of the Democrats, etc. It's actually like really kind of, I feel like the administration like shoots itself in the foot in that way when it tries to control what people are saying.
Yeah, yeah. I just saw too, like there's another Justice Department, not indictment, beyond indictment. It's actually a trial has started of, and this is not getting attention anywhere for some reason, but like a collective of like black socialists in America who have street cred going back decades. And they're of course like anti-American in many senses, but they are American, right? And they're famously, I forget the guy's name, but there's a rap group called Dead Prez, and there's a song called Police State. At the beginning of it, there's a clip by this black, like one of the reverend leader of the one of the groups in this that were charged, and he talks about the need for police in an unequal society, and it's like private property that causes all this, whatever. And it's a famous song. I heard it when I was in high school. I mean, I was in high school a long time ago now, and this song is famous within like conscious hip hop or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the people that's being tried right now, and it is not random that I'm bringing this up. It's because the Justice Department claims that they were working on behalf of Russia, and that Russia, like Russian influence, KGB officers or whatever, were
Wow.
reaching out to these black socialists in places like Florida to sort of justify the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and to like promote the idea that like Ukraine is part of Russia, et cetera, et cetera. And I have no idea like what the ground truth is here, but black socialists in America are super pissed that the white left is not covering this, that mainstream
Totally.
media is not covering this. And you have to think your news is covering this stuff and no one else is covering this stuff. And if you think it's trumped up in the first place, because it's like, what the fuck do we care if there's some like, white people on another continent fighting each other, like if that's your mindset, well, dude, and you're getting prosecuted by Biden's Justice Department, you're probably not going to be voting for Kamala. You're
Yeah.
probably going to be voting for Trump, if anybody, probably not going to vote at all. But so like this, there's a larger trend here intersecting with like, black men, blacks in general, sort of drifting away from the Democratic Party at the same time that the Democratic Party is just like the great caretaker of the national security state, and this obsession with like Russian disinformation, all kind of like all these stories are kind of converging, but it's like a dark cloud. I don't know.
Seriously. Seriously. Yeah. No, I actually had not heard about that. It's like McCarthyism 2.0.
Yeah, yeah. And like it's totally possible that these people are guilty of whatever law they're being charged with, but like just the idea that it's not being covered is the weird thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of this larger pattern of like prosecuting people for various forms of like foreign infractions that are like weird white collar things, but they're elevated to this like national security kind of, I don't know. Second best take, it's from Christian Lorenzen in the London Review of Books. It's called Not a Tough Crowd. And he was at the DNC, and this piece that he wrote for LRB offers this gentle but devastating critique of the Democratic Party. And so he says, this quote, I think captures a lot. So I'm just going to read it out real quick. Democratic Party is now the party of labor and of capital, the party of debtors and of bankers, the party that mocks the Ivy League but is largely run by Ivy Leaguers, the party of anti-monopolists and of Silicon Valley, the party for immigrants and for border security, the party of insiders and of the marginalized, the party of the football team and of the sorority, the party of family and of freedom, the party of ceasefires and of the war machine, the party that opposes fascism but abets genocide. In Chicago, we were constantly reminded that it was the party of joy, whatever that means. So
That part definitely made me giggle.
yeah. I mean, basically, and this is what I thought. I mean, all of those things are true. And that says a lot. Like, it's a party whose contradictions are going to be resolved one way or another because this is an unstable coalition. Like, these things don't get to all coexist together indefinitely, and they can't coexist equally. Somebody's benefiting and somebody's not, because these things are like a lot of zero sum frames, you know. But he says that, like, there's an argument at the very end of the piece, and he goes, the new nature of the Democratic Party is only going to be revealed when, quote, it faces significant resistance from someone other than a gang of rich scumbags and the folks they manage to con.
Mm,
And what I mean, basically, it's like the base shitty nature of Republican Party elites right now, like the governing class within the Republican Party. Like, there's such horrible politicians that, like, it makes it possible to have this like deeply unified front, or superficially unified front, of Democrats. But as soon as, like, there's some alternative to this motley coalition that's coherent, even if it's not good, it's going to shatter this coalition. And that the pieces are going to like coalesce in one direction or another, and like, who knows what the future is. But like, I thought this was like a very smart way of understanding the Democratic Party now, because it's like grim in a way and ridiculous in a way, but also, like, there's some rays of hope there. There's footholds for something better, you know.
mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, this piece, and I didn't watch the DNC, I'll be so honest with you. I put it
It
on for,
was a
like, 5
lot.
seconds,
There
and I
was a
was just
lot to watch. It was like,
I was just like, "This is corny." I don't and
there was cringe in, yeah.
they're trying to be everything to everyone. And I think that they do that in an attempt to, appeal and relate to folks, and I think that that's why Walls has been so successful, because he's just, like, actually a normal person, um, and he speaks like one,
Yeah.
and his kids love him, you know, which people hate apparently. But like I watched this Donald Trump interview with Friedman recently.
Lex Friedman, yeah.
Lex Friedman. And it was so funny because Lex is like asking him a question about, what do you respect about the Democrats? Like, you know, on the subject of, you know, unity, if you do become president, you're going to be everybody's president. Like, what can you say something nice about the Dems? And he basically was just like, no, fuck those people. And I think it's so funny because Trump, I mean, I think you're right. I think that like Vance is a terrible politician. He's so awkward and strange, and he just like hates women. And people are like, why would you even say the cat lady thing? Like, you could just like run with family values. You don't have to go out like hating on people.
Yeah.
And whatever, like we already talked about like the voting thing, and that was crazy. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that Dems are trying to be everything to everyone. And Trump has never tried to do that, and that's why people trust him and feel seen by him, because he's sticks to his guns, and he is able to provide that like umbrella for other MAGA types like JD Vance, even though JD Vance is so incompetent and strange, that like Trump's just persona, like it encapsulates those who associate with him in a way that they gain people's trust, in a way that like the Democratic Party, and I don't want to talk about anybody specifically, but like I think that in general the trend is that the Democratic Party struggles to gain folks' trust because it just feels like demagoguery at every corner.
Yeah. Also, like, what we have now, you could maybe call a popular front as a party. You know, it's the anti-fascist unification or something like that. But like, the popular front in the 1930s, it was a cultural front. It, like, there was like Hollywood, pop music, or I mean, we didn't call it pop music then, but like the things that were cool were associated with the popular front. And
Mhm.
what it was not cringe, it was popular. It's a fucking popular front. What we saw at the DNC was cringe,
Yeah.
not necessarily popular, not cool,
Yeah.
certainly not cool, certainly not cool. And so there's something different about the popular front, if you will, right now. And I think part of it is like the old popular front was organic. It was authentic in a way. It was speaking to
Mhm.
people, and it had a material base in the fact that like labor was working class was the center of it in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
like that's really not the case now. Like the working class is a rhetorical trope. It's being co-opted in a way. We want it to be inside the tent, so we don't talk about it too. We don't criticize this point very much, but like they're not the centerpiece of this shit for sure. And I don't know, like this if this shit this is definitely not organic. Like this was all manufactured by like Hollywood producers that they consulted to make this happen. Like it's literally a show. And I think
Yeah.
that's maybe what you and I are responding to, because like we know we're watching a show. It's a performance.
Yes.
And it's not even and
A
like
particularly good one. Like, the
yeah,
whole
like we
Beyoncé
don't like
thing where
that shit.
there
Yeah.
was, like, someone who was supposed to come show up the last night, and I, like, very much followed it on Twitter even though I wasn't watching, and I was like, "Ooh, who's the guest gonna be?" And then it was, like, 11 o'clock, and I'm like, "I'm going to bed. Like, I'm not staying up for this shit." And I was so glad because there was no mystery guest. It was all just hype to keep people up till midnight on the last night of the DNC. It's like, "Y'all, it's been several days. Why would I spend my entire evening/night watching this?" And I think to your point about like the popular front being organic and like actually popular for like real reasons beyond fake mystery guests that might or might not be Beyonce. Um, like if my notes from your book are correct, which I have this right here for this exact reason, is that like also the popular front, in addition to being centering the working class, like also opposed corporate power and push national investment together. And since we were talking about manufacturing in the industrial base, you can't just push national investment without also doing like corporate accountability, especially now when we have monopolies that run like our media and the entire defense industry, etc. And like people respond to that, like they in we saw it later on too, like the Truman Committee. I know several folks in like sort of the Pentagon accountability space um, have advocated for that, which would be like basically a committee in Congress to focus on corporate accountability specifically. So you can't just throw money at things and also not address the structural factors that are impacting workers, consumers, and our ability to like make things.
100%. All right. Are we on to buy the numbers now?
Yeah, let's do it.
You have a number this
I
week?
do have a number. Yeah. Okay. So my number is $833 billion,
Nice.
which is the defense top line in the House Appropriations Bill, House Defense Appropriations Bill. So we're probably going to get a CR on the annual defense budget
Continuing
because
resolution.
yes, thank you. My bad. A DC alphabet soup is an affliction that I
Yeah.
am unfortunately suffering from. But yeah, so $833 billion. It is keeping in line with the budget caps from the debt deal last year. I will just note for reference for folks that the emergency spending bills, like supplemental for Ukraine, that in Israel, was it all together? There were so many different versions of it. Now my brain is muddled. But we passed a supplemental spending bill earlier this year, one that the administration had requested back in October. But those don't count toward the debt deal budget caps, just for the record. But yeah, so we're probably going to get a continuing resolution. Appropriators have passed a bill in line with that. So we're just going to kind of put the defense budget on autopilot at last year's level, and then we'll probably get the NDAA resolved and the commensurate spending associated with that. The Senate Armed Services Committee approved, let's see, $878 billion for the Pentagon. It would be about $923 billion for national defense in general. So while this may seem like appropriators passed a bill that is in line with the budget cap instated in the debt deal, it is likely that that is a temporary situation, and we are in fact going to see pretty significant defense increases. But TBD, Congress still has to reconcile the fiscal year 2025 annual defense policy bill, the NDAA, which like does set this top line. But yeah, so I thought I would throw that out there. Appropriations is a mess. Theoretically, they're supposed to pass spending bills after authorization bills, but like here we are.
Nothing matters. That's the
Nothing matters. Nothing matters. The legislative process is fucked. Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty fucked. I mean, so for people who aren't familiar, like you having to fund the defense, having to fund anything by a continuing resolution creates like, or it's a sign of dysfunction. Like you couldn't get sufficient agreement, to actually have like a defense appropriate and healthy health, quote unquote, healthy defense appropriation, healthy in the sense of like normal legislative process, right? But yeah, two things I think worth noting quickly. One, there was a article in the Monthly Review last year, I think, that did this kind of deep analysis. It's a socialist magazine, but it's like they do a lot of serious analysis. It's not like hot takes or whatever, like 10,000 word journal articles basically, but like socialist. So Monthly Review had an article that made the case that we're doing accounting of defense spending like kind of wrong, and that actually the national security budget, if we think of it like that, is $1.357 trillion already.
Yeah.
And so like we're way past even $1 trillion based on like if we just do the accounting slightly differently,
Right.
which is like a problem in itself. But the other thing that I'm reminded of by this is that like we're talking, once you add supplemental spending plus continuing resolution top line spending, we've eclipsed $900 billion a year, right? And clearly we're in that $1 trillion sort of range. But like, all for what? I mean, it's so that we can have 40,000 troops in the Middle East, which I just saw a thing from Ken Klippenstein being like, they just confirmed Defense Department just confirmed we have 40,000 troops in the Middle East. 40,000 troops in the Middle East in year of our Lord 2024?
Yeah.
Really? The country that's supposedly not at war anymore? What the fuck is going on? Like I can't handle this, man. So like I wouldn't like I teach a thing on strategy with like some military officers sometimes, and one of the things I try to stress is this concept of a strategy force mismatch, and the idea underneath it is that like when it comes to the defense budget, it doesn't matter how much the objective number is and whether number goes up or number goes down. That does not matter. It only matters relative to what you're asking of the joint force.
Right.
What are the roles and missions that they're trying to accomplish? And it's at that level where we are fundamentally broken, where we're fundamentally overcommitted, where we fundamentally have bad, dangerous, explosive theories of security that involve sacrificing lots of people, including Americans. And that the idea that we're going to spend $1 trillion a year in order to sustain that machinery of bad vibes is insane to me, and so the problem isn't the objective number, it's the objective number relative to what we're asking them to do, and what we're asking them to do is all nonsense. I mean, that's like the my takeaway, I guess.
Yeah, it's wild that like we are already at risk of strategic insolvency, and we are still doubling down. Like, as the Biden administration would say, well, we can walk and chew gum. Like, can we actually? Like, have you checked out the DoD audit? Like, I don't think that we can, and I don't think that we should. And I don't think it's the best use of our resources or our people. Yeah, it's insanity. Thinking about like our force structure too, it kind of just feels like it would be better for us strategically, cheaper and safer for service members if we took folks out of the Middle East and just vibed with the reservists. I mean, I'm not a force structure expert, but that's kind of where I land.
40,000 troops in the Middle East. They cost $1 million each. A certain number of them are going to die. I mean, like what? To sustain basically like a low-key regional war with the
Yep.
genocide in the middle of it. Like what?
Mm-hmm.
Fucking
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Okay. All right. Well, great episode. Thank you for
Yeah, this was fun.
helping me air my grievances.
Always.
All right, gang. That's gonna do it. I forgot. It's been so long. I don't remember how to sign off. But like us, share us. Yeah. See you. All right. Peace.
See you next time.